All right, so this is a quick introduction video to 21E8. 21E8, it's not a search engine, but it's a search index, and that is effectively the same thing that Google uses to respond to search queries. But rather than the Google index, which is a proprietary index, no one gets access to it except through the Google search engine. This is designed to be a not just a open, accessible, standardized way to look up information on the internet, but it's actually designed to be distributed. So that means that lots of different companies, you know, thousands or potentially millions of different people, they can all own little bits of the metadata associated with discovering cool content, finding people, playing games, and actually even interestingly solving computational problems on the internet. Everyone can own a little bit of piece of that data. And so rather than simply this idea of data ownership where you own your cat pictures and you can ask Facebook you know, not to do things with them that you don't like, here this is actually designed to help you create information that you own and that can earn you money in a essentially an economic version of the web. And today it's actually very difficult to go about economic activity on the web. It's sort of designed to funnel you into these platforms where they have ads and they have big monetization sort of engines designed to give you something for free in exchange for information, so that they can use that information to essentially build a monopoly or what's called a moat around that particular data service. And so what we've created is a way to very cheaply create new little marketplaces where people can buy and sell and exchange data without all of the huge sort of DevOps startup cost sort of things that you would usually expect to be able to run some sort of you know, business on the internet in terms of a data business. So here what you see is it's kind of like a hybrid of Google, where you can look up information, and Reddit, where obviously you can have a topic and people can contribute to adding links and curating and commenting on that data. So we don't have commenting yet, but essentially you can just type in a topic, and here if I type in iPhone, you'll see that we get back a bunch of URLs from people sort of trying to sell iPhones. And so I can use this essentially the same way I would use Google, where say if I wanted to buy an iPhone, then I could essentially just click on this link and I'll go to Amazon and find iPhones for sale. What's interesting though is that instead of this just purely being generated by a company, it's sort of, you can influence the structure by which the content is ranked. So you see there's a weird number next to each of these things, and that's what's called a cryptographic hash code. It's essentially the identity of that data. And you'll notice that the ones at the top are sort of a green color, and as they go down the page they turn more blue. And that's because we're applying proof of work, which is how Bitcoin works, to create a bias over the content. And what this means is that we can essentially rank, or you can essentially vote for computing power to influence how that information gets ranked in the page. So rather than just Google adding an ad at the top, say you thought that this URL here for Spark, there's a bug here, it's showing the URL twice, was the better option, then just a few clicks to invest some computing power into that item is going to be enough here on this local demo to just boost it up the ranking. But you could imagine that the topic of an iPhone, of iPhone would be pretty competitive, because there's so much money associated with people looking that up if they're wanting to buy one. Yeah, and that essentially enables us to have, so each of these is what's called a digital asset, And that means that it's basically just a database record that is associated with me in particular, because I've actually personally invested the computing power to create that item, in the same way that if you build a house with your own resources, then you own that particular asset. And so what we plan to do is have each of these registered on a blockchain, so that some people can be in the business of ranking content, but they can essentially sell assets associated with that to people who want the outcome of a highly ranked item, but they don't want to actually sort of go through the process of figuring out how to get the compute together. So we can just outsource it. So the other thing that I wanted to show is, you can see I sort of prepared a highly ranked piece of content here, is that we can actually enable you to submit content as well. So usually you just have, let's say in the Google example, you have to get your content indexed by the Google search engine, and then hope and pray and do what's called search engine optimization, that your website will get up the list for a particular topic that you might be looking up. And instead we can actually just enable you, and then, sorry, your other option is to basically just buy an ad, so you just buy the top slot. So here we're sort of able to show how you can kind of do both of those in a much more straightforward way, which is that if you go to a topic, you can just add your URL directly onto here. So I'm going to go to Urbit Live. I have a tab open. So this is a website called Urbit Live. It lists planets for sale. So say if this was my my thing, then I can just essentially paste that in there, hit the mine button, and it's going to mine that into the index. I'm not sure where it, yeah, it was right down the bottom. And then so if I wanted to rank it up, I just have to click that a couple of times. You can see it's at the top now. And then you see that I have this other one that has a bunch of work put on it, but it actually doesn't have a URL in there at the moment. And when we sort of implement the handing over, that is the exchange of the rights of a particular slot from one party to another, that would grant this essentially the user the right to include the information in that spot. So that's essentially equivalent to just buying an ad or even buying a domain name, if you want to think about it like that. But because it's not intrinsically in that position, it's just its own record. If something else took it over in terms of gaining more attention, then that would work its way up the spot as well, up the rank as well. And that's essentially it. The other thing, which you don't really see here, is that everything that I'm doing is saving it to my local computer, and that's because in a distributed system, there's actually no key central server that is collecting all of this data that you're putting into the index, because obviously looking up, your things like your search history, things like what you vote for, and so on, that's actually personally identifiable information. And so what we're doing is we're going to add a bunch of tools. We're going to help other companies do this as well. Give you lots of different ways to manage different kinds of data, so that if you're curating some information for work, if you're just playing a game on the internet, or if you're looking up actually quite sensitive things, then you can decide whether you want to keep that information in a private index, whether you want to put it in some sort of shared index, maybe it's for your company, or whether you just want to publish it on the public blockchain or on a public website, or even on BitTorrent. You can do that. Yep, and so one other thing is that we're investing quite a lot of work at the moment in GPU data analytics and GPU mining systems, so that you can automate the kinds of content that you want to be sort of investing your compute towards, instead of having to manually go through this, link by link, which I think is useful when you're focused on that particular topic. But more in general, there are all these different ways that you can be investing your computing power, and we're going to essentially be building kind of economies to help you manage that. Yeah, cool.